I don't really know how to address the topic of the first part of this video without just saying that I don't like Elon Musk. Now, it's not in the same way that he's not liked by a lot of people. I don't care about his presence in video games. I don't care about how he conducts himself on Twitter. I find him to have the same views that a lot of rich people have, especially when we talk about homeless people, as he has talked about them in disgusting ways. I guess I am disgusted by some of the things he's done and said. The fact that he has been defended for straight up doing a Nazi salute at the inauguration is something that is mind blowing even to me. But we're going to talk about him. We're not going to talk about him at the same length that we talked about Norman Finkelstein, because Norman Finkelstein deserved to have however long that video was, plus more, because of all of the stuff that he's done for humanity and for the Palestinian Israel crisis. But without further ado, let's go ahead and discuss Elon Musk. So, he was born in South Africa, and his family, like the majority of billionaires and millionaires in the United States today, were very rich and very wealthy during his upbringing. His father was a electrical mechanical engineer and property developer, and there have been claims that his family had money, a lot of money that came in from apartheid era emerald mines. And if you're not familiar, that would mean slavery. They made money off of slavery. And his father has mentioned that he has received emeralds from mines he had partial ownership of. So if he had these mines owned in apartheid South Africa, which during this time period was at its peak, then he absolutely did. However, Elon Musk has really downplayed this to a degree. And, there's mixed narratives about the family background that we could really go into. But it should be noted that most billionaires, no matter what anyone says, no matter what any bogus list says, the actual data that can be proven, they're not self-made. They grew up in homes a million times better than whatever you and I grew up in. They grew up way better than anything you and I will ever see. That is, of course, assuming that there's not any millionaire or billionaire people listening to this video, but I guess we can move forward. He rose to prominence through ventures of Zip2 and X.com, which eventually became PayPal. His most notable achievement is, of course, Tesla. Now, Tesla played a pivotal role in the push towards electric vehicles, which we'll have a discussion about that at some point. But the fact that in order to fight climate change, we push towards electric vehicles instead of pushing towards mass transit in the United States and other places, it doesn't make very much sense to me. Of course, SpaceX, which, listen, you can harp on me all you want about this. There is nothing more wasteful of human resources and time than anything regarding space. We are destroying our environment. We are killing each other at massive rates every single day. We can't do anything in the entire world productively or without someone somewhere being destroyed or any of the other. Going into space is such a waste of time. There's nothing up there for us that will add anything to our race or add anything to our well-being. You can mark that down, and I will argue it a million times. There's nothing on the moon. There's nothing on Mars. Those are the two closest things to us that we could possibly get to. And Mars is still years away. And the moon? Why are we even going to the moon? What does it matter? Of course, satellites, those are things that have definitely made things better for humanity. You could argue worse, but there's no need to go to space anymore. I don't understand why anyone, especially when we talk about Elon Musk and his rise to prominence as we are, when he was being popular, same thing with Jeff Bezos and his just moronic going up to space, then coming right back down. It's just another way of wealthy people to show off how much money they have. And that's all Elon Musk was doing. He was especially big during the mid to late teens of the 2000 teens. That makes sense. 2010s is the way to say it. He made the Boring Company, which sold flamethrowers as a promotional item, which made him big. And as someone who lived through this, I can tell you that all of my Reddit nerd friends and everyone else that I knew that was big into internet culture was so excited about this. But honestly, outside of it being a good ploy to an earlier George Carlin comedy bit where he talked about how the government has flamethrowers and we don't have any flamethrowers, I don't really see any point to it. It's just kind of a pointless publicity stunt, which turned out to be all it was. And then, of course, he appeared on a podcast, which he still appears on from time to time, that I am not going to mention by name because, quite frankly, if you listen to this podcast or watch it on YouTube and you're watching this video, I don't understand you as a human being, and I hope at some point you will get this. But he made a big bluff on there by smoking cannabis and acting like he was some sort of new cool billionaire that, could be one of us, or however you want to say it. He's not one of us. He's not you. He's not like me. He's a rich person who is just doing whatever he wants. His early political engagement, he donated to both Democratic and Republican candidates, often aligning with his business interest. We'll get to that later, not just regarding him, but this is common practice for rich people. They donate to both sides because both sides, the Democrat and the Republican Party, are going to do what the business interests want. The only differences between the two are cultural issues. In the last couple of years, he's shifted to conservative politics. He has supported far-right candidates in the United States and across the world, as we've seen. He recently told Germany that they need to not feel guilty anymore, which, once again, this is the man who did the Nazi salute at the inauguration. Whatever his actual motives are, his insensitivity regarding the Holocaust has clearly been put on full display now. So he donated the largest of the 2024 cycle for an individual person, $250 million. He then was appointed to do the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, which is supposed to be a temporary organization, which you've seen it in the news every single day since the inauguration. They're eliminating fraud. There's no evidence for what fraud they're eliminating. They're pointing out things that are total mistakes, like they said they were sending condoms to Gaza. They got the wrong Gaza. They were talking about somewhere in Mozambique. They have decided to, eliminate several different employee programs. USAID has taken a big cut, which, we could talk about USAID some other time, but it's a whole other issue. And under this leadership, it has done a bunch of cost-cutting measures that have affected a bunch of different things and also have benefited him. You may have seen recently, and it was immediately said by the Trump administration, they have no intention of fulfilling it, but the government signed a $400 million contract, or maybe it was $1 billion contract, with Tesla to make armored cars, and so on and so forth. People who say Elon Musk, Donald Trump, or anybody else who is in this political atmosphere is a fool, stupid, crazy, whatever, they just don't get it. They're living in a reality where I would say they're probably neoliberals or really entrenched into the Democrat Party and just are attacking everything and following the party line. These are the type of people who hopefully one day you'll come over and you'll realize where we're at now, because you're the reachable people. A lot of people who are on the far right of things, we can reach them, as seen by the fact that a lot of Bernie Sanders voters would also turn and voted for Donald Trump in 2020 and 2016. And of course, the fact that 20% of Barack Obama voters in the 2012 campaign voted for Donald Trump in 2016 as well. There are people who we can all reach and gather and get to understand the basic issues because of the common interests that we all have. But Elon Musk is not a fool. He's obviously a very smart person to some extent, but he continues to use his power the same way rich people have used their power for centuries. Before we go on to the second half of this video, it should be noted that Elon Musk has done what all rich people from the Waltons and Walmart and Sam's Club and Amazon with Jeff Bezos and literally every business in the United States they've been criticizing for fostering demanding and unhealthy work environments. They are forced to work long hours, face high pressure conditions, and they face burnout at a crazy extent. Like pretty much every company in the United States, from the Amazon Corporation to the legal pot dispensaries and Starbucks and cannabis farms otherwise around the world. They have been accused of anti-union activities. However, it is important noting that the National Labor Relations Board, which is a very conservative pro-business organization that rarely ever works on the side of the workers out of place trying to unionize, found that Tesla had been violating labor laws and interfering with unionization efforts and ordered the reinstatement of a fired employee in 2021. Elon Musk was also directed to delete a tweet that was deemed threatening to workers regarding unionization, which, if we actually crack down on all the times people in the United States, employers who make up 3% of the United States population, did things to threaten unionization, we would actually have, unions that were powerful, and we wouldn't be seeing the great struggle that we have seen reemerge in the United States. For a lot of employees of Musk have said that he has high expectations with the demanding pace, and some of these people have said it leads to stress and poor mental health. This is the next important one. Like a lot of people who are billionaires, they feel like they're above the law and just do whatever they want. In 2018, SpaceX reportedly paid $250,000 to settle a claim from a flight attendant who accused Musk of exposing himself and propositioning her during a flight. Musk denied these allegations, and I'm not saying that this event happened or that Musk is lying. I'm just saying it's a settlement. We can all come to our own conclusions about that. In June 2024, 8 former SpaceX employees filed a lawsuit alleging that the company fostered a culture rife with sexual harassment. The suit claims that executives were aware of and permitted the environment, leading to a hostile workplace for many employees. So yeah, like I said, these are not new things specific only to Elon Musk. Most people, Amazon, other companies we could talk about for hours and hours have all these things. But it's important to talk about Musk because he just keeps making the news with his dramatic cuts and the way they're going to save the American taxpayer money. However, if we were going to talk about the most spending we do, you'd think we'd be talking about how we spend more on defense than the next 9 countries combined, including our 2 biggest quote-unquote enemies of the world, Russia and China. Maybe we could stop spending so much money sending weapons to wherever we're sending weapons to. Did you, for instance, notice that Trump, during his first week in office, started bombing Somalia? Did you know that? Did you know that we're currently involved in military action in Somalia? A place that, much like everywhere else where we're bombing, you can't probably find on a map unless you are an informed American. But no, you didn't notice that we were doing that because we've been too busy talking about whatever it is we've been talking about, whether it was actual tragedy, which was instantly turned into spectacle politics, or just lambasted with executive orders that have, like his first term in office, have all been overturned within a day or shorter than that to some extent. Now, a lot of mainstream media has seen Elon Musk infiltrate the government, and Bezos and Zuckerberg and all of the other CEOs and billionaires who were sitting behind Trump at the inauguration and said, it is the new American oligarchy, or we're finally heading towards that. Well, here's the thing. The United States has always been an oligarchy. Since its founding, it was set up purposely to be like that. And the next part of this video, we're going to discuss the history of this all the way through to the present period. Now, at the founding of the United States, and I've discussed this before, voting rights were deeply restricted, primarily benefiting wealthy white men. In fact, most states of the government required men to own property, which equated to about 1% of the population. If it wasn't for the property ownership, it was then having amount of wealth to vote, being able to purchase your way into voting. This is kind of related to other parts of the world that had similar systems, but we have to discuss it. Free black men, women, and other people who were not wealthy white men had no say until the late 1900s or early 1900s for a lot of people, women especially. And then, of course, we have the Electoral College and the Senate. This system was designed to prevent direct democracy. You see, if we had an actual democracy, what would happen is every single time there was an election, from the local to the state to the federal level, your vote on everything from policy to who was going to be elected to oversee policy would be voted on specifically by you, and all these would be added up to the popular vote. You know, the popular vote that we talk about every presidential election, that the Democrats win and the Republicans lose, but the Republicans still win office, and then we act like it's a big deal. But now that Republicans won the biggest popular vote they've won since the 2004 election, we just don't talk about it anymore. The Electoral College was specifically made to ensure that the wealthy had their final say, that they had the actual sway. And of course, we can also talk about senators who were initially chosen by state legislators, not voters. Now, of course, they're chosen by voters who are persuaded through massive ad campaigns, and then they're purchased through big corporations who funnel billions and billions of dollars. Actually, in the last year, it's now reached trillions of dollars into every campaign. The Founding Fathers also had a fear of the mob rule. The elite's fear of the mob rule led to barriers against direct participation. Figures like Alexander Hamilton and James Madison explicitly argued that governance should favor the natural aristocracy, wealthy landowners and merchants. This means, and specifically mentioning James Madison, as well as other people in the foundation of the Constitution, did not want the majority to have a say. They believed that only few should make decisions for all, which is what we have had since the foundation of this country and what we still have now. Second one is, how wealthy were the Founding Fathers? Well, they were extremely wealthy. George Washington was one of the richest men in the U.S., owning over 50,000 acres of land and hundreds of enslaved people. He leveraged government contracts and land speculation for wealth. In case you didn't hear that, the first president used his leverage to make himself money. Thomas Jefferson, a lot of people know this, he owned over 6,000 acres and about 600 enslaved people, and he was very wealthy, directly tied to plantations and slavery. James Madison was a wealthy plantation owner from Virginia, and he came from a wealthy plantation family, and he relied on, you guessed it, enslaved labor. Hamilton, he was not born wealthy, but he became rich through banking and insider connections, and he advocated for policies that protected financial elites. And finally, John Hancock was a shipping tycoon who was one of the richest men in the colonies and the world at the time. His economic power was a driving force behind the push for independence, which the majority of Americans at the time of independence was 35% for the independence from Britain. The wealthy elite coerced independent people and the majority into wanting independence and then fighting the British, and then they let the poor do their job for them. George Washington actually complained about the poor in his journal during the Revolutionary War because he was so disgusted with how these people were. You could see, examples of that throughout all of American history. The Vietnam War, Iraq, Afghanistan, Desert Storm, all of it, where we send the poor off to do our bidding while the rich people who are making money off of it stay home. Now, here is another big one. Slavery, which was the foundation of American capitalism and the foundation of wealth for many Americans. There's a really good book called The Half Has Never Been Told, but here are some examples in case you want to know what that book is going to talk about. But the Louisiana Purchase, Southern elites who were slave owners, pushed for this expansion so they could have another slave state. Same thing with the Three-Fifths Compromise. They wanted slaves counted so it could give them more power when it came to Congress. Now we can also talk about the gag rule from 1836 to 1844, in which Congress blocked anti-slavery petitions, mostly due to the Southern legislators who wanted to silence abolitionist efforts, and they allowed it because even though the North did not allow slavery, they still made money off of slavery because slavery put the foundations for the cotton mills, and it gave the materials to push forth the United States Industrial Revolution and other things that they needed to continue flourishing. Now, another thing we can talk about in a way of discussing the elites choosing things that were harshly destructive to people is how these practices and the elites in the early United States affected the indigenous people. One of the primary examples of this is the Yazoo land fraud. Georgia politicians sold vast indigenous people's lands to wealthy investors without the indigenous people's permission, and also then forced those people off their land. The same thing was with the Indian Removal Act, which Andrew Jackson, who wanted the land for money and for his rich friends to have money, pushed indigenous people removal so that they could take the land and then sell it for, you guessed it, plantation owners, who would then use it to make slaves work for free in torturous conditions and make money off of it. Another example of this is the railway and the railroad companies displacing indigenous people so that they could spread their railroads throughout the United States and killing indigenous Americans without any problem whatsoever so they could make a lot of money. And Manifest Destiny, you've all heard about it, was used to promote this. It said, hey, it's our destiny and it's the United States' destiny, God given, to have this place, when the reality of it was the elites wanted this land, so they killed a bunch of Native Americans and then went on to use that land for themselves. In fact, George Carlin once said it best: the elites own all of the wealthy and useful land. There is no land you can buy without already having upwards of $5 million that will make you money. Not anymore. You could maybe buy farmland that would allow you to have a living, but none of it is going to make you rich. All of the land with oil, all of the land with minerals, all of the land that has anything useful is already owned by people who are either going to sell it to other people who are in the elite circle or are going to keep it and pass it down to their children. Now let's get on to the 1900s, and there's no better place to start in the 1900s than the Great Depression, which has a lot of parallels to what we are seeing today. Now, by 1929, the top 1% controlled nearly 40% of the nation's wealth. Today, the top 1% controls nearly 60%. The government's focus on cutting taxes for the rich, like the 1926 Revenue Act, ignoring financial speculation, led to economic stability, like what we are seeing now for the masses of people. Now also, banks, backed by little regulation, also helped cause this by encouraging loans without proper collateral. We saw that with the 2008 crash, and we are continuing to see it today. And now, something that you have definitely heard of, because if you're watching this video, then you've watched my other videos, hopefully, or if you haven't, you can go back and watch. Corporations and the wealthy saw tax cuts while wages for workers stagnated. Wages for workers have stagnated since the 1980s. The minimum wage has not gone up since 2009, and even if it had gone up, it would not be raised to the limit of where it should be in order to meet the standard cost of living. And then in 1929, the bubble burst. And there are a lot of parallels to the 2008 financial crash, as well as to the financial crashes that we have seen throughout all of history in the United States. We average one every 7 years here. And if you had to ask me, knowing what I know about the economy from following economists that I like to read and watch, as well as reading the Financial Times and the London Financial Times, I would say that we are just about due for one. Now, the oligarchy suppressed and ended all of the socialist ideals. Now, the New Deal allowed for things like the Social Security Act, labor protections, and banking regulations, but they are only tolerated as crisis measures. Wealthy elites hated this, but allowed it because they were scared of a communist or socialist revolution like what had happened in Russia just a few years prior. As soon as the Depression was over, the United States government passed the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947, and it killed radical labor. It banned communist leaders and unions, despite communist being an intentionally vague term, which was then seen in McCarthyism when anyone who's considered communist, socialist, or maybe just too much of a Democrat were blacklisted, jailed, and otherwise punished during the Red Scare and McCarthyism. And because of that, we are continuing to see that today. It's why the idea of a socialist is so demonized. It's why communist is still used as an insult or as a term for someone who is a little bit too far left. It's why unions, up until the last 4 years or so, were unpopular and unsupportive in the United States. Now let's go ahead and fast forward. We're going to skip through the 50s and the 60s a little bit because we kind of just covered a lot. And we're going to talk about how Carter, Reagan, and later presidents transferred wealth to the rich. Carter, for instance, and we talked about this in my Jimmy Carter video, if you want to go watch it, from 1977 to 1981, and this is discussed as the quiet neoliberal shift. Despite his progressive image, Carter began deregulating industries, the trucking, airlines, and finance, and paved the way for corporate monopolies. He appointed Paul Volcker as Fed chair, who aggressive interest rate hikes hurt workers and the middle class while benefiting banks. Reaganomics from 1981 to 1989, once again, we talked about it in the Ronald Wilson Reagan video. There's 6 letters in every single one of his names. That is still weird. Tax cuts and deregulation for the wealthy. In 1981 and 1986, the Reagan administration massively reduced taxes for the richest Americans from 70% to 28%, and then shifted those taxes by raising taxes on the middle class quietly. No one ever talks about that when they talk about Reagan. They don't talk about the deficit he started either, but nonetheless, he deregulated banks, media, and corporations, allowing wealth concentration. I mentioned this in the manufacturing consent video, but at the time of the end of the Reagan administration, there was about 18 media companies. Now there are 6. Reagan was nicknamed by the unions who are still around from that time, Ronnie the Union Buster Reagan, because he would break up all of the unions, most famously breaking up the air traffic controllers union and setting the precedent for weakening unions everywhere in the nation. He fired 40,000 striking air controllers in one day. Then we get to Clinton, who continued the trend. He deregulated Wall Street, repealing key parts of the New Deal, like the Glass-Steagall Act, and accelerated economic inequality. Bush, Obama, and Trump all continued this pattern, cutting taxes for the wealthy while cutting social programs like welfare and education. Today, the top 1% controls nearly 60% of the wealth, and policies still overwhelmingly favor corporations over ordinary people. One of the biggest places you can see the elite structure and influence is through the military-industrial complex and using the United States military for their own interest. For instance, the Korean War was all about protecting corporate investments. While framed as a fight against communism, it secured U.S. economic interests in Japan and South Korea, ensuring dominance in South Asian markets. Military-industrial complex expansion happened during this time, with Lockheed, Boeing, and others began to see it as a permanent business model. The Iran coup of 1943 was all about protecting oil profits. Mohammad Mossadegh, the Iranian prime minister, wanted to nationalize Iranian oil. The U.S. and Britain, at the request of the BP and U.S. oil companies, staged a coup installing the Shah who was then brutal and killed tens of thousands of people until the Iranian Revolution. The Vietnam War was a disaster for everyone except for war profiteers. The military-industrial complex saw Vietnam as an opportunity for endless spending. Companies like Bell Helicopter, Dow Chemical, and General Dynamics made billions, while 58,000 Americans and millions of Vietnamese died. The war was unpopular, but corporations and elites ensured that it lasted as long as possible. That's something I should have talked about in the Vietnam video, but I wanted to focus more on the damage that was done, less about who was making it happen. Central America, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua from the 1950s to 1980s had brutal dictatorships to protect the United Fruit Company and other corporate interests. Over 200,000 people alone were killed in Guatemala, often with U.S. funding and weapons. And we talk about it a lot on this channel, the support for Israel and the military-industrial complex. There are a lot of reasons why the United States continues to support Israel, in spite of the fact that the majority of Americans are not happy with the way we are handling the situation there. And one of the reasons is United States military contractors profit massively from arms sales to Israel. Lockheed, Raytheon, and Boeing lobby heavily for military aid to Israel because it guarantees more weapons contracts. Post 9/11 wars, the invasion of Iraq, the invasions of Afghanistan, our military actions in Syria, Libya, and Yemen have become excuses for the military-industrial complex to continue, and over $8 trillion was spent on wars that benefited military contractors and oil companies while leaving millions dead. We can talk about this, and I'll mention it once now, and I'll probably talk about it when we talk about the Bush administration. Dick Cheney made himself a billionaire off of his actions as vice president that guaranteed United States would take control of oil in Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, conflicts in Ukraine, we talked about it in that video as well, but the United States oil industry made $200 billion during the first full year alone because of the sanctions put on Russia by the United States and Europe, and then the United States selling oil at 3 times the price that the Europeans would have paid from Russia, and they continue to support the war in Ukraine and push for further involvement and escalation despite the Ukrainians losing the war and losing massive numbers of civilians and soldiers, and their economy may never recover because of this. To finish, we're going to talk about what is called the revolving door phenomenon, where individuals transition between roles in government and major financial institutions. And it's been a notable aspect of U.S. political and economic landscapes. Goldman Sachs, in particular, has had numerous executives who have served in significant government positions and vice versa. And here's just a quick overview. Robert Rubin, before government, was a co-chairman at Goldman Sachs. He served as the 70th U.S. Secretary of Treasury under President Bill Clinton. After government, he joined Citigroup as a board member and senior advisor. Henry Paulson, he was a chairman and CEO of Goldman Sachs. He served as the 74th U.S. Secretary of Treasury under President George Bush, and then engaged in environmental and economic initiatives, founding the Paulson Institute. So hey, well, there you go. Stephen Munchkin, that's not how you pronounce that name, that's how we're going to say it, spent 17 years at Goldman Sachs, eventually becoming a chief information officer. His government role, he served as the 77th U.S. Secretary of Treasury under President Donald Trump from 2017 and 2021, and then founded the investment firm Liberty Strategic Capital. Gary Cohn, before government, was the president and chief operator of Goldman Sachs. He served as director of economic counsel under Trump. Mark Patterson, a lobbyist for Goldman Sachs, served as chief of staff to Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner under Barack Obama. John Corzine, co-CEO of Goldman Sachs, served as a U.S. Senator from New Jersey and governor of New Jersey. And Judd Gregg, who before government was the U.S. Senator from New Hampshire and then became an advisor to Goldman Sachs. This is very close. I mean, you kind of caught it there. Goldman Sachs kind of just infiltrates the government whenever they want. And we could also talk about the former Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, his career and financial standing, how his father, Donald Blinken, co-founded the private equity firm Warburg Pincus, which significantly contributed to the wealth, and then he also was within the government. So why does this matter? It matters because while the oligarchy is terrible and Elon Musk, Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Blackstone, and all the other major companies that are funneling money into the government, into the Trump administration, and to Congress are definitely bad, this is nothing new. The whole country has been set up like this since the get-go. It just is what it is, and there are ways to fight it. A couple of ways are support your local labor unions. Support the national labor unions. If you hear labor unions are going on strike in New York and you live in Oklahoma, support them anyway. Send them money, promote them. You start hearing people spread misinformation about them, correct it. Lobby your representatives best you can. Go talk to them. We've talked about this a million times on this channel, but you can find them however you want. There's a link in the description. A good friend of mine recently brought my attention to an app that allows you to have your representative's information at any time you need it. So go in the description. It'll be there. This was a long video, the longest one I think I've ever done, but I really wanted to get all this stuff out while giving proper time to discuss everything we discussed. As always, Palestinians, specifically in Gaza, really need our support and our care. The first link in the description will always be the United States Campaign for Palestinian Rights. Go there, click on it. In this website, you can do a few things. The two main ones that I focus on are the Take Action page, where you can find organizations supporting Palestinian rights, including protests you can go to, and how to contact your representatives. They generate emails for you. A couple days ago, they generated a phone call for me to call and talk to my representatives about. And they also allow you to stay informed on the issues that they are currently focusing on. Secondly, you can donate to them. I've said this before, I said it again, I don't donate a lot, but I do donate monthly. $15 every single month to this organization because I believe they are doing their best to make sure that Palestinians have support here in the United States. The other pro-Palestinian link is the World Food for Gaza. I'm still linking that one as of right now, even though there are aid trucks and food being put into Gaza. Famine has been largely pushed off, but that could go at any day now. That all being said, beware of misinformation about prisoners that is happening right now. Beware of misinformation about a lot of things. If you hear misinformation, no matter what it is, make sure you take the time to correct it and let someone know the facts. Whether it's something that you are personally proud of to know is fact, or you just believe in it and you know it to be true. Thank you so much for watching this video. It's been anything but casual, and I will see you next time.